Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Steve and Jeanne Bell, where they share their story of their family and infertility and how God brought them through that. So let's get to the conversation with Steve and Jeanne. Steve and Jeanne, thank you for being guests on our podcast and sharing your story. And as we begin, could you share a little bit about your professional journeys?
Sure. You can go first.
Okay. I went to Burlington High School and I worked at Hy-Vee grocery store on Angular Street, and a lot of my coworkers were a year ahead of me or a year older and interested in law enforcement, and by hanging around them and listening to their conversations and the good times they were having in college and stuff, I decided to go into law enforcement to hang around with a lot of my friends, and that's how I got started with law enforcement.
Okay. And myself, I went to Burlington High School too. That's how Steve and I met. Band room romance. He was, of course, a drummer, and I played clarinet, and we were in marching band together. And our first date was a football game that we went out of town, and he just kept following me around for some reason, and so that's what started it all. But that was my junior year in high school. He was a senior. And after, I was always interested in sewing and fashion, and I had a retail job in high school, so I decided to go into fashion merchandising, and that's what my degree is in. I went to Columbia College in Columbia, Missouri, and after I graduated, I worked full-time for a year at Schramm's department store downtown in the bridal department, and that really gave me my first full-time job. Was learning everything there was to know about the bridal business. That's where I met Becky Johnson. I sold her a wedding gown, and I've known her ever since. And so it was a very special time. I still love weddings and brides and everything about that. So then we got married when Steve graduated from college. And I will say, too, though, it's the first year we were married, between the sheriff's department, which Steve knew all the deputies because he had worked at the jail, and
State police.
And he knew the state police,
West Burlington.
Right, and he also knew the Burlington Police Department because that's where he had done his internship. So that first year that we were married, there was, I kept track, 14 divorces between the two departments. And I remember thinking, what have I done? But I knew we were in a good place, and we just saw so many marriages fall apart. But I think that helped us be a little bit stronger, and I hope you feel the same way.
Yeah. So I went to college at Western Illinois, and then did an internship at Burlington Police Department and tested at the Sheriff's Department and the Burlington PD at the same time. I was in the final runnings for both, and the Burlington PD called first, so that's where I went. And then, yeah.
You spent your whole career with Burlington?
33 years.
Yeah, 33 years.
2 years prior at the Sheriff's Department while I was attending college. Worked midnight to 8, commuted to Macomb for a year, and then, or 3 years, and then got hired.
Now, how long have you been married?
44 years.
Well, congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
inspiring. So, and so you found ways to not be a statistic like others in that particular profession.
Right.
Any reason why? Any secrets to marriage?
Well, she was a good listener. I spent most of my career on nights.
19 years on night shift.
And so I could share a few stories with her, but a lot I couldn't. And a lot of officers got in issues with their wives talking too much. So she was a good listener, and she didn't spread rumors or gossip. Very good at not gossiping. We both tried that to control who we shared our stories with. So you're pretty much your friends or the people you work with in law enforcement, because a lot of people that you thought were your friends are no longer your friends. So you kind of hang around with that group. But we tried not to do that, keep friends outside of law enforcement, and I think that helped us.
Yeah. Creating healthy boundaries sounds
Right.
like something that
Balance
you guys...
a little bit.
Yeah, that's good. Now, can you briefly share a little bit about your background, growing up, spiritual background, if any, that type of stuff?
I grew up at a Presbyterian church on Division Street, First Presbyterian. I don't remember attending a whole lot. Probably most of my years I went when I was in junior high. Went through the classes there, the catechism classes, I believe they called them, and became a member of the church. And I was an only child. I went there with my mom and dad. And then I met her in high school, and that's when we changed churches.
So you grew up in the church?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I did. I'm Baptist background, so I grew up, and it was always Mom and I that went. I have 2 older brothers, but they never really went to church. And my dad drove a truck long distance, and he was only home on weekends, and most of the time he had to work on his truck. So it was always Mom and I that went to church, and so I just always remember going to church my whole life, and became a Christian at church camp when I was about 12, and then got baptized that same summer. And it's all church, and being in the youth choir and then the regular choir, and it's just always been a big part of my life. So, but I remember when we were dating, I did share, with Steve that I was a Christian, and what my values were, and I like to think that I influenced him a little bit to share.
Yeah, our conversation was in Crapo Park, if I remember right, one night, and we were getting more serious. Ended up dating for over 5 years.
5. Mm-hmm.
Thought we both went to college. We thought if we stayed that far apart and still stayed bonded, made it through things, we get back together, and we did. So, yeah, she shared the Lord with me in my car, parked at Crapo Park one night by the fountain, if I remember right. Mm-hmm. Would have been in 1977, maybe, the year before we got married.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that's fun. A little bit of background. Now let's switch gears a little bit. You guys got married, and you wanted to have children. Can you share that journey with us?
You can.
Want me to go? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we were married in 78, and it was probably my brother and sister-in-law. They had a baby after we'd been married about 3 years, and so that was when my first niece came along. And when other family members started having children, then that kind of gets you thinking. But we were busy with our careers, and it wasn't until we had been married about 7 years that we realized that, we really wanted a family bad, but it just wasn't happening. And it was kind of hard because
we were like 29, 28.
Right. And when you think it's time for you to have a baby and it's not happening, literally everyone gets pregnant and is having
People
babies.
start asking us, "Well, it's your turn."
And then when you're married like 7 years and no children yet, so I'm very hypersensitive to other couples, because I know if you've been married 7 years, you either A, don't maybe want children, or B, you want them and it's not happening. So that's really hard. I remember at my 10-year class reunion, there was so many of my classmates, girls, that were expecting babies at that time. They had them all lined up, and they had a group photo. And I was on the committee, so of course I am not pregnant, and seeing all my classmates, and I had a big class. There was probably 20 ladies in a row, all, expecting babies. So during that time, I went to the bathroom and had a good cry. But it was just really hard. But we kept really busy. We didn't really talk about it to anyone until our pastor at the time kind of asked us, and maybe he sensed that he should. So he asked if we were planning on having a family, and we're like, well, we would really like to, but nothing's happening. And I had been going to doctors, and we had started the infertility process, which is probably a whole nother podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So he originally was from Cedar Rapids, and he knew of an adoption Christian counseling agency in Cedar Rapids that did adoptions, crisis counseling for teenagers, and marriage counseling, different things. And it was called Keys to Living. And he suggested that we check out that agency and just get our name in, just so we would feel like we were making progress towards what we wanted. Because by this time we had been married 7 years. So you want to pick it up from there?
So the process involved home studies, I think, were first, application, registrations, an autobiography, which when you start writing out your life, it gets rather detailed, and you're like, wow, I have done a lot. But anyway, they wanted to see your background, and then we got on a registry. We had a couple interviews up there, and of course there's fees with everything that you do. And they told us that we'd probably be going to Guatemala to get an underprivileged child, because they had lots of babies there that didn't have parents. So this went on for how many years? 3 years. And I'm going to jump to what was next after the 3 years?
Well, you couldn't say why we got domestic.
Oh, yeah.
Put on the domestic
They called us
list.
when we went on the domestic list, which meant an American child. We said sure, without hesitation, we would go that route. And one day she was working at the mall, and I was on my way to buy something. I needed the checkbook, which she had, and the phone rang at her store. And she's like, oh my gosh, Steve, it's the adoption agency. And we hadn't heard anything. We had updated our stuff like once a year. They would call, are you still interested? So we're on a list as far as we know. We didn't know, like a top 10 list or where we're at. And the agency called and says, we have a baby boy. Are you interested? And that's all we knew. So we're both listening.
And he was a month old.
In a month old, we had the old regular style phone with the headset. So we're both trying to listening to the phone to the lady talk to us. And we said, yes. We said, well, come up here in 9 days. So we had 9 days notice to throw everything together.
So this was 3 years after the adoption process started, and we had been married 10 years now. So we have 9 days to prepare for a baby.
After waiting that long.
And most people have 9 months to prepare. We had 9 days. So we went on a buying spree, and we got everything we needed, we thought. And it was a very exciting time. I mean, we had a shower thrown for us. The police department put together one of those, and everybody was so excited for us. So we go up on the day we were supposed to the adoption agency in Cedar Rapids.
Yep.
And we both sit in a room, and we had a car carrier with us, and
we had a diaper bag.
A diaper bag that I thought I had everything I needed, and
the baby was under care of a foster grandmother who had done 60 or 70 babies there. Mm-hmm. So we're sitting in a room just like this, and out of the corner of our eye we see an elderly lady whisk by with a baby and shut the door.
There was a blanket over.
And she stood up, and I had her sit down. I'm like, just wait a minute. And
I was very anxious.
So they went in another room and opened the door, and they said, you guys can come in now. Wasn't he in the floor in a little baby carrier? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Had his hair spiked up. He was a month, 30 days old. And we didn't know if limbs were missing or retarded or disabled or anything. We knew nothing.
We just knew he was a boy and 4 weeks old.
And we said yes. So we were nervous. We took a risk, had faith, and it all turned out. So then they said, you can touch him now. So she picked him up, and we went home, and we got home, and there was 50 people at our house, like a housewarming, and had the house all decorated. And
in the parking lot of the agency, tell them what happened when we
but
took him out.
It had been raining all day, and there was a huge rainbow.
Oh.
There was. But also, we go to put him in the car seat to get him in the car, and we couldn't figure it out.
Well, back then they were
The
like molded
strap.
buckets.
The straps were not doing what, and we were
Thir-
looking at the instruction manual,
33
and
years ago.
I remember saying in the parking lot, if we can't even get this baby in the car seat right, how are we going to raise
Yeah.
a baby? So, but we got it figured out and drove home, and that's when we saw the rainbow. So.
And that baby is now almost 34 years old.
And so you rode off into the sunset.
We
so,
did.
so that was,
We did.
Drove off into the ever-ending rainbow.
And had a welcoming party when we got home. So that was very special. So we were parents all of a sudden, and we just took one day at a time. I took 12 weeks off work at the time, and I was the manager of a store at the mall. At that time, when you adopted a baby, you didn't get any maternity leave.
It wasn't covered by any.
It wasn't covered because you didn't
insurance
physically
or-
had a baby. So I'm glad those kinds of things have changed for adoptive couples, because most places will give
But ours was
maternity.
not final. Was it 4 weeks or 3 weeks? The termination of parental rights. The birth parents, which we knew nothing about at this point, could terminate that and then get the baby back. So we had to hire an attorney and meet with a district judge,
But that all came out fine.
which they all knew me anyway from my law enforcement career. Appearing in front of a judge was no big thing for me, and they thought everything was going to be great. So
but it was still part of the process.
part of the
There was-
process.
There's uncertainty.
It was the final of what we had to do.
Yeah. So, and by that time, in 4 weeks, you'd fallen in love. So,
Yes.
so that's. I'm sure it was. It was good, but once that 4 week, once it was official, you could relax a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. But, now your story doesn't end there.
No.
So could you?
So fast forward 3 years. So now Eric, our adoptive son, is 3. We had told the agency that we would like to have another child. We didn't want to have just one. So we were on that list again. And by now we're married 13 years. And it was a very hectic time for us. You can maybe jump in about, that was the year of your promotion.
Oh yeah, 1991 was a big year in my career. I got promoted. I caught a bank robber. I caught poison ivy for the first time.
You got put on night shift.
Night shift, got
He
promoted,
was on
right?
3 to 11.
Yeah,
Now
back-
he's on 11 to 7 a.m.
You lose seniority with a promotion, you're at the bottom of the list, and you go back to night shift. That's when I got promoted to lieutenant and
Sold our house.
sold our house. We bought a lot. We had no property but a land of a lot of grass, and we had to move in with my parents because our house sold immediately on our own. We didn't think it would happen that fast. And my mom and dad lived in town, so we lived with them for a little over 3 months while we built our house.
And that's when I discovered I was pregnant.
And I didn't believe her.
And it was not like in the movies at all. Here we've waited 13 years, and I tell him that I think I'm pregnant, and he says, I'm not believing some drugstore test until you go to the doctor. So
Yeah.
I went to the doctor the next day, and lo and behold, I was expecting a baby. Now, this time, I'm 34 years old. We've been married 13 years, but that was God's timing. So I worked up until the day I had her. Eric, our son, his babysitter's aunt had a baby, and the baby's name was Rachel. So when we told Eric, who's 3, that we were going to have a baby, he said it'll be baby Rachel.
He thought all babies
He
were
thought all
Rachel.
babies were named Rachel.
So he named
So
her.
he named our daughter Rachel. So
Do they enjoy that today?
Yes.
Okay.
They know that. They know
yes,
that.
yeah. So now we have a boy and a girl.
She's 30 and he's 33.
Uh-huh.
And now they have children, so.
Yes. So
And you watched one of your grandchildren.
yeah,
So
I
you
watched
get it-
Rachel's little boy. Yeah.
That's fun. So as you think of your story, what helped get you through?
Well, like I said, when you're trying to have a baby, everybody around you, everything on TV, you are so hypersensitive to that fact, it makes it really hard. So I think, at times I felt like it drew us together, but at times I was very resentful. I thought, why can't I have a baby? Everybody else is. I'd make a good mom, Lord, why are you punishing me?
And I remember my grandma was getting old, and I would pray that my grandma would get to see us have a grandchild. And she died when my son was 5. So she got to see that perk.
So it tests your relationship with each other and with God. But we still had faith. We kept busy all the time. I mean, we had busy careers and busy lives, and of course, adopting Eric, that took the pressure off. But we still wanted to have one of our own. So the good Lord provided. It just was not on our timeline. And I feel like, we learned patience in a big and mighty way. We really did. A lot of patience. So.
I was just thinking, I think I've seen this stat on Facebook, so it's got to be true. 1 in 4 couples have some type of infertility struggle. But I'm sure your story is similar to most people of how difficult it was. And sometimes people can be insensitive,
right.
Even though I don't think they're trying to be. But I'm sure, I'm guessing somebody came up to you and guessed, are you pregnant? And that just broke your heart, I'm sure.
Or what are you waiting on?
Yeah, yes, what are you waiting on? And I just want to, for those listening, make sure we be sensitive to that.
Very sensitive to couples, because you never know what their story is.
And so Eric and Rachel are adults, have children, and so did you learn anything through this? I mean, like, if someone's going through this, what can you share with them?
Well, it did really help when our pastor told us to go ahead and start the adoption process, because we were going to doctors and things. We went to Iowa City. We both were tested. We kind of felt like
didn't really find any.
They never did find anything specifically wrong with either one of us. I remember every time you get that diagnosis sheet that you take when you go check out of a doctor, it always said unexplained infertility. I hated those 2 words because that's what it always said. So there never really was a reason something to blame it on. I never miscarried. I never, so I'm thankful for that. But still, it was hard and it was a struggle. But, we kept praying. We had faith that eventually that we would get our wish that we would be parents.
10 years.
But it did take a very long time. And so you just got to have so much patience. And once we did start the adoption process, we told our families, because we hadn't even told them. They just thought we were taking our sweet time, having a baby. So that helped us have a dialogue with people like, we're going to adopt, and everybody was very excited about that. And we shared that with some of our friends, and he even there was 2 other policemen that were kind of going through the same thing that we didn't know until we kind of shared and then they ended up adopting too.
Right. Same year, a state trooper and a sheriff's deputy and us all adopted boys the same year.
So
and through my son's school career, they all knew what kids were adopted. They kind of hung out together, and they all had stories and wonder why they looked different than their parents, and they would tell each other. And then I think a lot of them figured it out, heard it from their friends.
And that is nice to have almost a support group, of people with a common experience that you had peers that were raising adopted children, and you had adopted kids that could just kind of relate to one another, because that can be a difficult dynamic. If but your family is very cohesive from everything you've told me, but prayer was a big thing for you. It's a common thing you've mentioned in our conversation. You've mentioned it in the past, that your grandma got to see your kids, and how God answered our prayers. And I believe it's Psalm 37 that talks about God will give us the desires of our heart if we seek Him, and that doesn't mean it's a genie in a bottle type thing, but that God wants to bless us and pour His Spirit out on us.
Mm-hmm.
And since my son was 18, he has now spent time with his birth mom, birth dad, his half brothers and sisters, and we've met them all. We don't hang out; they live in different towns, but we've met them and talked socially. So it's kind of neat. It's all been good.
And then the little things like he can know his family medical history, now,
Right.
right?
It was a closed adoption. We knew nothing, but
Yeah.
Right, and not until he was 18. Then he started asking questions, and he wanted to know. And within a week, we got in touch with the agency, and they provided us everything we needed. And
we had to provide our phone number. They could share. They were like a middle person. And being in law enforcement, I was also inquisitive, and so my son was. And we tried searching online. We could find absolutely nothing. So when I went, I was in Cedar Rapids on a working, and I went to the agency and told them that he was 18. And they're like, I don't think that'll be a problem. So we started changing phone numbers and photographs, and got to meet, and they all showed up at his high school graduation.
high school graduation.
Both sides of the family. We had everybody at our house.
Wow.
So it was kind of nerve-wracking that day, too.
A little bit.
Because they hadn't seen each other either. So,
So they all came.
yeah.
That's fun. That's great. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share today that we missed something or we didn't cover that you just felt like, I want to share this?
No, I think I'm good.
I just want to stress that you do have to have a lot of patience, and I think it's like you said, just be really sensitive to other couples that you don't know what people's backstory is, and if they're trying to have a child and it's not going well, or adoption, but just be supportive and love them through it.
Well, that's a challenging word for us today. I appreciate you guys sharing your story.
Okay.
I mean, your kids are grown now, and so you've been able to process it, but it was still a painful time for you. So thank you for sharing and just letting us hear part of your story, how God has worked in your life. So thank you for being on the podcast today.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life. And please subscribe to never miss an episode.